Hello, welcome everyone as you're joining. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening. We're going to have 45 minutes of packed, awesome, crazy cool bills that are moving through the legislature. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll get started in just a moment. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, can everyone see my screen that I'm sharing?
Yep.
Great. So just a couple of reminders that for attendees who are joining, there are several ways to communicate with the panelists. There's the Q&A function. So as our members are kind of walking you through the bills, please feel free to send them questions that will pop up for them. And then there's also the chat function for you to use to talk to the panelists in a more interpersonal setting. One of our staff, Nick, is going to be dropping in some links throughout into the chat throughout our webinar so that you have access to everything. And we are going to be dropping a big link too that has all the information that we go over. So you're going to see a lot of information on your screens this evening. Please don't feel like you need to furiously scribble everything down. We will capture this information and we will get it to you so that you're not having to sit there and write down all of the phone numbers. So anyways, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We want to make sure that we do finish by our promised time of 45 minutes. So the very first thing we want to do is just give you a real quick recap of how a bill becomes a law in the Colorado State Legislature. So on the screen, you should see the House and the Senate. This is what it looks like. These are slightly older pictures because now they have clear plastic partitions in between the desks to help with distancing, and of course masks are required. But this is what the House floor and the Senate floor looks like. So when we use the word floor, these are the images that should come to mind. So you'll see that the House is its traditional green color and the Senate is a traditional red color, and that's how you can kind of identify the two rooms. So when a bill is introduced, a bill is sponsored by a legislator. Each legislator carries 5 priority bills. And what happens is it can be introduced in either house. So a representative in the House or a senator in the Senate can introduce a bill, but it moves through both bodies no matter where it's introduced. And so let's say that House Bill 21-1119, which we will talk about tonight, that one was introduced and sponsored in the House because it has an HB, so that means House bill. Whereas for a Senate bill, it would be SB, Senate bill. House bill numbers have 4 numbers towards the end, and Senate bill numbers have 3 associating numbers at the end, and that's the number of the bill. The 2-1 indicates the year, so that's for 2021. Bills do repeat themselves, so when you do look up a bill, if you decide to in the future, you'll want to put in that 2-1 because there could be a House Bill 1119 from year 2019. So just really quickly, each bill goes through 3 readings in both chambers. So the first reading, a bill is introduced and then assigned to a committee. A bill must go to a committee for it to be viable to become a law. Once it goes to the committee, in that committee, so once it goes through the second reading, it moves into a committee. And the committees do several things. So listed down here, I have just the House committees, which are examples of the types of committee that a bill can be sent to. And then here is an example. This is the House Energy and Environment Committee for 2021 of the legislators who make up various committees. And usually they're assigned based on interest and maybe professional experience or geographic location of who they represent. So just picture all these faces sitting in these great chairs up there. In a committee, this is where we hear testimony from the public, that's us, where we hear testimony from the sponsors as well. And it's also where bills are updated or amended. And bills can be killed in committee. So if the bills do not pass with a majority vote, they are dead and they don't move forward, at least for that year. But if it passes, it then moves forward to a second reading. So the second reading takes it back to the floor where legislators of the full body hear the bill are able to discuss, and they can make amendments on the floor. A third reading then happens. A second reading and a third reading can't happen on the same day, but can happen on the very next day. And during the third reading, this is when the votes are cast and the bill is either passed or failed. If the bill passes, it moves over to the other chamber where it goes through the exact same process that it just went through in the previous chamber. So once it's passed through both chambers with amendments, it then goes to the governor's desk to be signed. And there's a variety of things that he can do. He can choose not to sign it and the bill still does pass. If he chooses to veto the bill, then of course it has to go back to the legislature with a 2/3 vote. That is how, in essence, a bill becomes a law in the state of Colorado. And I really just wanted to take you through that really quickly so that as we move into the bills we're going to be discussing this evening, you can kind of picture where we're at in the process for these bills, and also know that we might ask you to take an action on a bill this week, and we might come back 2 weeks from now and ask you to take a similar action on the same bill. And it's because we want to make sure, of course, that it works its way through the entire process and is ultimately passed. And so we can help it along in several different ways. That is just a really quick overview. I'll now come out of there and pass it over to several of our members who are going to be presenting 3 big bills that we have really exciting actions coming up for. And then I'll come back and give you just a kind of a little bit of taste of some of the other bills that are moving through the legislature if you might be interested in those. But we're going to focus on 3 priority bills. So to get us started this evening, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who's going to talk to us about what we call the Animal Shares Act. It has a very less fun name in the legislature, but we call it the Animal Shares Act. So take it away, Catherine.
Thank you, Jerry Ellen. Good evening, everyone. So I don't know, most of you probably remember at the start of the pandemic, the grocery store shelves emptied out a little bit. And one of the commodities that emptied was meat. And so we heard a lot about people driving around and seeing that there were lots of cows around, but there was no meat on the shelves. One of the reasons why this happened is because meat processing is so consolidated and concentrated in the hands of 4 big packers. So there just aren't very many community located processing plants. So most towns in the West do have small processing plants. Unfortunately, most of these are not USDA inspected. They're what are called custom exempt plants. And that's where people might take their own backyard cow or their deer or elk that they've hunted to get cut up and packaged for them. They're termed custom exempt because this means they don't get inspected by the USDA. However, the facility is approved and inspected by the state. So it's just not willy-nilly. There is some standard of cleanliness that they have to live up to, and they are licensed and inspected supposedly annually, but I'm not really sure if that happens. So the purpose of this bill is to really unlock the potential of the small community processing plants to provide more meat for local areas. And this is important because, and this bill was introduced to allow animal shares to be sold prior to processing. And one of the reasons why this bill is really important is because people have been doing this for a while, but it isn't really strictly legal. And so what this bill does is really spell out what you can and cannot do. I don't know how many of you look at like Craigslist or some other advertising places, even in the newspaper, people are advertising meat for sale or animal shares for sale. But again, there's no real general rules about how to do this. And this will really clarify what you can and cannot do. So when you buy an animal share, you can buy a share of an animal or of a herd and receive a share of the meat after processing. This transaction must take place prior to the slaughter under this bill. This bill covers cattle, sheep, hogs, goats, bison, and rabbits. This bill requires that the purchaser is made aware that the product is not regulated or inspected. So the owner of the animal has to either hand them a card or have it prominently placed at their place of business that the animal was not inspected. The delivery of the meat from the seller to the purchaser can occur anywhere in the state, but it cannot cross state lines. the meat may not be resold. So it's a transaction that happens before the animal is slaughtered between the buyer and the seller, and then it can't be resold. The animal may be slaughtered by the seller, so that means on the farm by the person that raised it, and that's especially important for rabbits because there's nowhere to process rabbits anywhere else. Or it can be taken into one of these custom exempt plants and processed commercially. The shares can include value-added products. So that means you can make it into sausage or jerky or things like that. The other thing really interesting in this bill is it protects the seller from some liability. So there's a clause in the bill that says the seller is not liable for, undercooked meat contamination or things like that that might happen at the home. And that's something really different from any of the other bills that we've seen come out of other states. So it has a lot of good points in it, and it really will clarify a lot of the confusion about how animal shares will work or should work. So right now, this bill has passed the Senate and is going into the House. So some of the actions that we need is just people to call their legislators and tell them, either as a consumer or as a rancher, tell them why this bill is important to them, because it really will free up more local product for people to consume. People will get, sometimes it's a little hard to think about purchasing a live animal for slaughter. But when I think about it sort of as a CSA for animals. So you can buy or put money up and own part of the whole herd and just have a constant supply of meat. So you're never going to have to worry about, an empty grocery store shelf because your meat comes from somewhere else. So, as I said, it passed the Senate and is going into the House. I think there's a lot of support from it, but calls and letters and emails will really help our legislators make the decision to support this. And I think there's really no reason why they shouldn't support it. It's really clarifying that something is going on anyway. So if anybody has any questions, I think I have time for a few. Is somebody going to read the chat for me, or I need to look? I see it.
I don't see questions in the Q&A yet, but we will keep it open for just a moment. Thank you, Nick, for posting lots of information in the chat. Nick, if you wouldn't mind sharing the link of the big doc that we're going to be sharing with everyone out. On there is for your actions. Of course, this is a lot of text that we've got here in the slide, but so what we're asking folks to do first is email the House committee members of the Agriculture Committee, which is where the bill is moving to in the House. And Nick and Catherine have put together for you a call script and an email script so that you don't have to create the language yourself. So the link that Nick just put into the chat has that information for you. So it should be as simple as a quick copy and paste. And so for Catherine, that means, maybe it's a 5-minute action that will really help see this bill be successful. And we do have one person who says, I have been buying meat from Homestead and Delta for years by the quarter. Is this a cow share?
No, the Homestead meats is USDA inspected, so they're allowed to sell it, by the single cut, and they can wholesale it. So it's a different mechanism. This is from a custom exempt, not USDA inspected plant.
Awesome. Well, if there are any other questions that come up for Catherine, we will come back at the end and just kind of review the different actions we've asked for each bill. But I just really appreciate, Catherine, you taking the time. You all won't know, but Catherine has been instrumental in seeing this bill make it to the stage to where it's at. And right now, not only was it hard to find meat on the shelves, but we need to make sure that we're supporting our local ranchers like Catherine and many other ranchers who make up our ag committee in order to make sure that we have local foods available for us in the future. So this is really exciting. If you have any other questions, we will definitely come back. But for now, we will move on to our next bill. And that is what we've coined the Suicide Survivor Protection Act. It does have a different name on its bill as well. And for this, I'm going to turn it over to, we have two presenters, and that's Liliana Flanagan and Colin Wilhelm.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to WCA for having us. We're both really excited to be here. Like Jeriel said, I'm Liliana. I am actually a former West Slope Youth Vote intern, of which Jeriel is our amazing program director. I'm currently a student at New York University, obviously not at university, but I'll get there eventually. And I'll let Colin introduce himself really quick, and then I'll get right into it.
Hi, thank you, Lily. My name is Colin Wilhelm, and I'm an attorney out here in Glenwood Springs, and also a candidate for office on some things. But I really got involved in this organization because this particular bill speaks very highly, or speaks to me on many different issues, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. And just thank you for your time and your attention to this very important bill.
So the first thing I want to start out with is, how did this come about, right? So there are a lot of issues that we all deal with that we would assume are nonpartisan and eventually become partisan. But as you can see in this sponsor list, this is a bipartisan bill, and it also spans the rural-urban divide. So we're really excited about the prospects of this bill, and we're excited to have all of your help in making sure it passes. So I just want to talk a little bit about my experience and how, this bill came about with some of the wonderful people that we've been working on it with. So I am a former District 51 student. I graduated Palisade High School class of 2020. So I've gone to public school in Grand Junction my whole life. And my freshman year of high school, there began a sort of series of youth suicides that started to come to students' attention. And when the first one happened, it was devastating for a lot of students. And the way that it was handled was that students and teachers and administrators were not to speak about it, and somehow that would fix the problem. And that's kind of jump-started a group of students who came before me, who said, this is not the way that we need to be dealing with this, and something needs to change to make sure that we are able to process this tragedy that's directly affecting us more than anybody. So some students worked with the district and helped everybody understand that peer-to-peer support and postvention are two very, very important things that are helpful to students after a tragedy happens, especially a death of a fellow student. So these sorts of legislative things and different programs have been in the works for the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. If anybody knows of them previous, please let me know in the chat, because I am very curious about it. But when we sort of came together to put forth this bill, we realized that this was a historic piece of legislation. So no other state has anything mandating any kind of postvention as suicide prevention in the future. And Colin will get into sort of what that means and then some more specifics of the bill. This is really, really important, especially for rural young people and during a pandemic. Grand Junction is not quite as rural as it gets, and that's where I live. But those of you, especially those of you who live in very rural areas, understand that it can be very isolating and you might not have the access to the right resources. And so through this bill, we want to make sure that every student and every person who goes through a tragedy has the right resources, and that the state of Colorado is having and adhering to the correct protocols to make sure that we can help as many people and young people in our state. So with that, I'll pass it over to Colin to talk about a few more specifics and about postvention.
Thank you, Lily. Yeah, this bill is historic and groundbreaking. It's the first bill in the nation to actually address postvention efforts. And what we mean by postvention efforts are the people that are left behind from suicide. We're addressing the issues that affect the attempt survivors, people's families, friends, healthcare providers, and also first and last responders, along with educators. As Lily mentioned and talked about, when somebody in school commits suicide, students are almost twice as likely to have suicidal thoughts and 3 times as likely to attempt a suicide, just by the fact that that happened in their school. And one of the main reasons that we need this bill is we don't know why that is. There's been so much research that's been done on prevention and intervention to suicides, but there's been very little research done on postvention. What this bill does is it starts to open up the discussion for postvention research and postvention training, and figure out ways to allow our first responders and our educators and our students to have some information and get help after that terrible, terrible tragedy has occurred. So one of the things that this bill does is it renames the state office of suicide prevention and intervention to include postvention. So that way it's right up in there with it. So now we have a state focused organization that will be addressing all 3 of those areas. Hopefully we'll be able to then work with different ways and get more research done on why people are more likely to commit suicide if they have a friend or family member who's committed suicide. We also know that only 46% of suicides are related to mental health. So why is that 54% there? We need to do more research, and this will allow us to help us do that. Also, what this bill does is provide some very important tools right away to people. It includes education and provides follow-up care for suicide attempt survivors and their family members, including specializing counseling, training for K through 12 educators, and postvention care to care for their students and also themselves after this happens, efforts to communicate with students to address the loss, and then also efforts to help treat those first and last responders. We know that officers are more likely to commit suicides after they've experienced a suicide. They're more likely to commit suicide after they've experienced a suicide than they are after a deadly or vicious attack on another person. Rolling up on a scene of a rape or a murder creates for some reason a less likely suicide response. We don't necessarily know why that is yet, so we need all these research tools to be done. So that's why this bill is so awesome, in my opinion, and something that's great that Colorado is leading the way. And right now we've been creating this bill so that way it is very bipartisan, as Lily said, and we'll get through this Congress with as little fiscal note as possible. And you've seen that we have some very good sponsors on this bill. What we're asking for people to do right now is this bill is going to be going towards committee in the House on the 16th. And we want people to if you're interested in testifying about this, about suicide, about anything in relation to suicide, contact your representative to try to get testimony into the committee that it's going to be into, and then also to reach out to those committee members in support of this bill. And then I'll turn it back over to Lily to finish up with anything that I might have missed or failed to touch on.
No, Colin, I think you hit basically everything. Like Colin said, we really would love your help with passing this through. This is not just a rural issue. This is not an urban issue. It's not a red, blue, purple, bright green issue. So, we want to make sure to show as much community support as we possibly can. As Jeriel has likely so eloquently told all of you, 50 million times. This process is accessible, and it's meant to be accessible. So we're just calling on you all to help us make sure that this passes, and passes in a landslide, because like Colin mentioned, this is a historic piece of legislation, and if Colorado can lead the way, other states will follow, and ultimately it'll make sure our future, it's just that much brighter, and it's all past partisan sort of divide. So with that, as long as I didn't miss anything, that's what I'll leave you with.
Are there any questions for us right now?
Just a reminder that Nick has been dropping the links into the chat. So thank you so much, Colin and Lily, for taking us through that. And there's some good information in the chat for any participants to access if you're interested in reading through the bill, or looking at the members that we've asked you to reach out to. And it includes how you can sign up to testify. And again, we'll come back to questions here in the end. So thank you so much. Just really quickly, I want to mention 3 other bills. We're not going to go into depth on these. Western Colorado Alliance has not taken a position on these yet, although we anticipate that we will. But we just wanted to, if those 3 bills just weren't enough, we wanted to highlight some others that are coming up. So tomorrow in committee, and committees, by the way, always generally start at 1:30 p.m. I'll mention that a little bit more in just a moment, but tomorrow in committee is the House Bill 21-1030, and that's expanding peace officers' mental health grant. What this does is, this is of course not a community in Colorado, but what this picture is indicating is that this provides financial assistance to bring mental health professionals into partnerships with the local police force, so that as police are responding to incidents around town, there's a mental health professional available to be with them, because oftentimes law enforcement is not trained and do not know how to handle situations where someone is having a behavioral or mental health crisis. And so a mental health professional can turn the situation around in a way that it might not have been able to go if they're riding along with an officer. So that's a really cool program. There's several bills like that, but this one's coming up in committee tomorrow. Another bill is Senate Bill 21012. We did discuss this in our first webinar when we just didn't have very much calendared yet. This one has been calendared now, so I wanted to make sure that we talked about it again. And that's the former inmates with fire service experience. So if you were on the previous webinar, what I mentioned is that there are 3 SWIFT, and that's an acronym for State Wildland Inmate Fire Team. There's 3 SWIFT teams, all 3 of them in the 3rd Congressional District, one of them in Rifle, where non-violent inmates are able to apply to serve on these 35-member teams and go out and do wildland fire fighting. And they're paid $6 a day, or at least they were the last time it was reported on. And that's what they're able to do with their time during incarceration. However, once they get out, there's some barriers because it's because our fire stations are government run. There's barriers for them to be able to get a job in a service where they've already been trained and have experience. So what this bill does is it removes that barrier, and it incentivizes and asks that wildland fire teams are reaching out to former inmates who served on these teams during their time of incarceration, and making sure that they're aware that there's job openings. And then it also creates a peer program to help these inmates as they transition, not only with a job, but also just in connecting to resources in their communities and be able to be more successful overall. So this is in committee on March 11th. If you're interested in that one. And then another one that's not scheduled for committee but was just dropped yesterday is House Bill 21-1162. Western Colorado Alliance heavily prioritized a bill similar to this last year, not identical to this. This is different. And it's, again, not calendared yet, but essentially it would eliminate plastic bag use as well as polystyrene, and it would incentivize bringing reusable bags. There would be a fee attached to needing to purchase plastic bags, and then eventually plastic bags would be removed from stores and paper bags would be the alternative for a fee if you don't bring your own reusable bag. So the Plastic Pollution Reduction Act has been introduced and has not been calendared yet, but here's just 3 bills to follow that have totally different paths you could go down in terms of what's going on at the state legislature. I'm not going to linger on this slide long. I just want to help you visualize again who your legislators are. Again, this information is not in the main doc, but we can add this to the main document so that you have access to it. Here's all of our West Slope legislators. For folks who are tuning in from Mesa County, Representative Janice Rich, she represents much of the city of Grand Junction. Representative Matt Soper represents much of the county outside of Grand Junction, as well as some of Delta. And then Representative Mark Catlin represents Montrose and Perrywell, Garfield County. You can kind of see them listed out here. And then our senators as well. Ray Scott is the senator of Mesa County. And then Don Coram is Southern. He's our senator for Montrose and Uray and a couple others. So these are just our legislators, just to give you an idea of who is representing us. And then very last, I just want to come back to the 3 bills that we're asking for actions on. So all of these links have been dropped in the chat numerous times. Nick, if you wouldn't mind dropping one more time, the big link to the document that has all of this information in it, that would be great. The first link is a Find My Legislator. I just went through that last slide really fast. If you want to know for sure who your legislator is, you just have to type in your address and it will take you directly to it if you click on this link. So you'll know who your legislator is that you can reach out to. Legislators love to hear from their constituents. You have the most impact when you are talking to someone that you vote for. So definitely feel free to reach out to them. If you're ever interested in listening live to what's going on the House or Senate floor, there is a Listen Live channel. So we've attached that in the main document as well. And then a big one is the Sign Up to Testify. It's totally different this year and it's way better. So what's new about testifying this year is that in years past, we do have remote testimony instead of having to go all the way to the Capitol, which we do love to do, but we could do it here at the colleges. And so that looked like signing up a week in advance and testifying in a room at CMU. It's really awesome that we have that opportunity, but this year you can do it from your house in front of your computer screen. So if you click the link that's either on the screen, but also in the big doc that Nick just added, you can sign up to testify in 2 ways. You can provide written testimony. You definitely want to submit that before the committee is in. And if you submit written testimony, that testimony has to be heard in committee. So it will be read and taken into consideration. Or you can sign up for the very powerful virtual audio testimony. And so that means you would be on screen presenting in front of your computer 3-minute testimony. What's difficult about this is that committees are always scheduled at 1:30 and they hear several bills oftentimes. And so it can be a wait. You have 3 minutes of talking that you do, but sometimes you might wait for an hour and a half, even 3 hours once you've signed up to testify, and you do need to be available and ready and sitting there waiting. That's the one difficult thing about providing remote testimony in front of your screen, but it is the most impactful, most important form of testimony you can provide because you bring your personal story, you bring your heart, you bring your face, and you bring your position of where you are in your own community and what's so important. So please, if you have time and there's something here that has spoken to you, consider giving that time to provide testimony. So on the side are the 3 bills that we are asking for your support. Again, that big doc, which is in the chat, is the one that has all the information of who you should reach out to. It provides to you the copy paste text that you can use or the script you can use when making a call. We're trying to make this as easy as possible. And if you have any questions about the 3 bills that I just quickly mentioned, but we didn't go into detail on, I did include those in the big document, and you're welcome to reach out to us with any questions for more information on those bills. So that's basically what we have for you. We're right at 6 o'clock. But if anyone does have additional questions, I want to make sure that you have a chance to ask them. So I'll ask that our panelists stay on for just a few more minutes. But otherwise, that's the majority of our content. And if any of our panelists have anything else they'd like to add, please feel free to do so now.
I'll chip in with something quick to Jeriel's point that lawmakers like to hear from you. It's truer than it may sound. It really, especially these days, with the session kind of being locked down, not a lot of people, able to meet in person under COVID. Probably 80% of the people they hear from are other legislators or state bureaucrats helping them figure something out, or lobbyists. And so it is still a fairly rare conversation for a constituent to reach out. And I would certainly encourage you to do that. At the end of the day, these are real people, and they respond in really positive ways to citizen ideas.
Janice, I see that you raised your hand. If you would type a question into the chat, if you have it, either the chat or the Q&A function, our panelists are here and would be happy to answer your question. And while you are typing that question in, I will just quickly say, between these two chambers, between the House and the Senate, these beautiful rooms you see, is what is the lobby, right? And so who our legislators hear from the most are the lobbyists standing in between these two rooms, with both good and bad intentions. Of course, the lobbyist does get a negative connotation, but we have really great lobbyists out there, including our own. And our legislators really do love to hear from their constituents. They know these lobbyists by their first names. They see them in their offices all the time. What really gets them excited is when they hear from you, because then they know it's really important. And you're the most important voice, because you're the one whose community is going to be impacted by it. Okay, so Janice is asking, how can we testify tomorrow for the mental health bill? So the way that you can do that is in the big document, or Nick, if you wouldn't mind one more time, just putting in that sign up to testify link. Nick is going to drop that link in there for us, Janice, and that will, you just click on that link. And in fact, I can really quick stop sharing my screen, and I will take you there. We'll take you there quickly so that you can see what that will look like. Oh boy, I am only so talented when it comes to technology, and that's not very much, is what I will say. Okay, so you'll see here that we're on the Colorado General Assembly website. What Nick is going to do with this link that he drops in, if you go to leg.colorado.gov, you won't have to do this with the link. It'll automatically take you there. But just if you're coming from the start, you would want to click on committee and go to public testimony options. This takes you to where you can sign up. So you can sign up to testify in person, remotely via WebEx. So this is if you're on screen with your computer, or to submit written testimony. Once you click one of the options that you would like to choose, then it takes you to selecting the committee that it's in and the time and the bill that you're hoping to testify on. It's as simple as that. You go ahead and get signed up, and then you're ready to go. So hopefully that helped answer that question, but the much easier link is in the chat now, so thank you. And there was another question, I think, for Joel. But Marianne is going to ask offline. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for attending this evening. Just really great to know that we're still going to bring our voice over to the Capitol, even though we are not going to be attending in person. And it's really awesome to see folks like Lily and Catherine and all of our members who are really championing the bills. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. So have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Jeriel.